Welcome back to the Anti-Meta Club. Something amazing is happening. We have Monza Group 3 with only hard tires, so fuel and tire wear is not an issue whatsoever, and the Bape's pretty balanced. Because of that, there are a lot of cars, but I've chosen one car that I really like as our anti-meta car. Let's get into it. Our anti-meta car of the week is once again the beautiful McLaren 650S. For the first time since right before I started making this series, the Bape is actually pretty close, which is really exciting, especially with the official season coming up. Since so many different cars work, I wanted to use the car that you have the best chance at beating the meta cars with, and this car has a few different traits that make it incredible. It has very, very good handling, extremely good grip coming out of corners, and you can brake extremely deep. I may be wrong, but I think there are currently only 3 650Ss on the entirety of the top 100. You can clearly see that the RCF and the GR Supra are absolutely incredible here. Our friend AZR1 had a time of 147.999, which was just barely squeaking under 148, and I just managed to get right in front of him, but it's very close. It's wild seeing so many Supras considering it's been nerfed twice recently. For really long straights, or any track that has a really long straight, it's important not only to note your one braking marker, but many multiple references, because you're sometimes going to be really close to people and you're not going to be able to see your normal reference. Look for the 150 board. When you get all the way past it, when the rear end of your car is past it, then you hit the brakes. Give it 100% brake pressure all the way down to first gear and start turning in after the 50-meter board. As soon as you're sure that you can hit just your left tires on the curbing, you want to come entirely off the brakes and start sneaking in throttle. Aim for approximately the end of the green soft barrier in the distance, and when you turn in, give yourself just a tiny bit of braking, making sure you're coming off the brakes before you try to apex, and then get on that throttle gently, but as soon as you possibly can. You do not want any kind of tire spin here, but slight tire spin is definitely better than waiting too long to get on the throttle. I've seen a lot of people this week go left and try to set up for this right hand. You really just need to stick to the right side of the track. It's not going to slow you down just steering and staying really close to the right line. Keep your eyes up for the 150-meter board, but the red part of the barrier after that is your braking point. Once again, you need to have the discipline to brake fully in a straight line, get all the way down to first gear, and start turning in at the beginning of the curve on the right. Get back up to second gear before going over the curbs, and I'm slowing it down even more to show you how much you have to cut these curbs. As long as your outside tire is still touching the colored part of the curb, you're going to be fine. On top of that, you want to make sure you're actually giving it a lot of throttle as you go over, just lifting slightly as you hit the high part so you can keep as much weight to the back as you possibly can for stability. Once again, looking for the meter boards for guidance, we're going to wait till we get all the way past the 50-meter board before hitting the brakes. We pretty much immediately start trail braking in, downshift to second gear, making sure that you apex following the tire line that you can see on the ground, back up to third before you get on the throttle, and when you exit, you've got to make sure that you don't go at all past the curbing. If your tires go over the outside of the curbing even a little bit, it's going to pull you off to the outside and it's going to make you slip, killing your momentum. Once again, using the 50-meter board, this time we're actually going to brake about a car length before the 50. By now you should be in fourth, and as you get past the 50-meter board, we should turn in third gear, again following the tire marks, and you should avoid the high part of the curb here. It's not impossible to use, but if you bounce off it wrong, you're going to go past the curb, and just like the last corner, if you go at all past the curb, it's going to suck you off into the sand, or it's just going to, at the very least, make you lose all of your momentum. You're going to find yourself following people really closely through this section of the track, so make sure you remember that there's a bit of a curve there. Luckily, this little bridge is here so we know when to brake when we're right behind people. But when you can see this little access road, the very end of it is when you want to hit the brakes. Get down to third gear and turn in at the 50-meter board. We want to use as much of this curb as we possibly can, making sure we attack it, continue steering past it, but without hitting those big bumps on it. You want to be full throttle and going as fast as you possibly can here until you see these tire marks, in which case you want to change directions. You can stay full throttle initially, but you're going to have to come off a little bit to stay close and tight on this curb. Momentum through this section as well as exit speed are both very important, with a slight emphasis on exit speed. So this last little diamond that you see on the high part of the curb, I make it a goal to get fully on the throttle before that. You want to turn in late enough that you can miss that high part, that high little sausage curb on top of that curb, and you want the weight transferred all the way to the right side of your car before you go over that curb. Once again, as you exit there, you've got to also make sure that you don't put your tires at all past the curb, because just like the previous corners, if you do go past it, it's just going to suck you off the track, give you dirty tires, and kill your momentum. A little bit before halfway between the 100 and the 50-meter boards is where you want to brake. Get down to third gear and turn in after the 50-meter board. You want to continue trail braking and decelerating, getting down to second gear. After you see this platform, there's going to be one more set of lights on the right, and right before that, you want to hit the apex all the way onto that curb. Gently get on the throttle so you don't get any understeer, and make sure you're not steering too much. If your tires are screaming, you know you're turning too much. Once your tires have ample grip because you're not accelerating as hard, you want to make sure that you take this line right here. Stay really tight. Taking this line can actually save you like an entire tenth, which is crazy to think about. So the first thing I want to note is that I used +5 brake balance, and I also used weak ABS on this car. It's not really a good habit because this game does have dynamic weather and dynamic lighting, but this little shadow that the tree sets right after the 150-meter board is actually a really good place to hit the brakes, or at least right before that. You usually want to avoid the big sausage part of the curb, but if you hit it just right, it can get your car to rotate just a little bit, and you can still get on the throttle really early. That's what happened right here. It's something I try to do every single time, but if you hit too much of the sausage, then it rotates you too much, and it takes you way too long, or it can actually spin your car. I want you to be really aggressive with the chicane. Paradoxically, the more throttle you give it over this little chicane, the more chance you have of not sliding. I know it sounds ridiculous, but keeping as much weight on the rear of the car makes it so you have as much traction as you can get, and you can really fly through that chicane. I can't stress enough how much it's important to not go past any of these curbs. If you go out on that AstroTurf, it'll just suck you into the sand, and you definitely don't want that. I mentioned this before in the breakdown. I think I mentioned it before in the breakdown, but it's really difficult to see ahead of you, especially if you use this view. So luckily this bridge is right here. You've got to use that as a reference to know when you can hit the brakes so you can stay close to people. You don't want to be too close to people, but if there are people close behind you, then you're not going to have much of a choice. So it's really important not just to get like one reference for your braking. You've got to get as many different references as you possibly can so you know exactly where you are, even if you can't see directly in front of you. This final corner is really cool. Parabolica, as it used to be called. You can actually brake even later. You can brake earlier, and you can just use your control of the brake and the throttle to apex at different points depending on what your situation is. You might be able to get a little bit more speed by apexing later there in time trial, but I'm not sure. During my stream today, I actually had a fantastic race in the McLaren. I think I started 10th, finished in 4th. I got to race some really incredibly fast people, including the one and only Supra GT, but unfortunately, the race was actually kind of boring from my end. We'll get back to that in just a second. This race was also really cool. We've got Irias, we've got Rataka, we've got Naked Ape. Hi, Naked Ape. Sorry, I almost forgot to say hello. And Manny Rodri, who's a former World Tour driver. In the race earlier, the one that I did earlier today with Super GT won. It was actually a really good race on his part. Windfire was driving a really ridiculous car from pole position, and I was chasing the British Wind, another incredibly fast, one of the world's fastest Gran Turismo drivers. And it was fun, and I got a good result, but it didn't really showcase at all what this car can do against the meta cars. So because of that, I decided to do another race, and it was the perfect time because a lot of the fast EMEA drivers were up. I've talked about it before, but I really don't like driving in my region at this time of day because the lobbies are not really full of faster drivers, and this isn't at all a hit on the slower drivers. It's just really not fair showcasing what I can do with the anti-meta car against those people in just pretty much any car they're driving, because it's just the skill level is so much different that you can't really show off what the car can do as much as I'm just showing off what I can do. And that doesn't help anyone when it comes to talking about an anti-meta car. This, however, as you can see, these are skilled people. This is Monza T1 in a sim race. I'm starting from behind and there's 0 incidents. That's incredible. On top of that, another reason I really like racing in EMEA is because not only are there more talented drivers over there, especially at this time of day, most of them actually use the meta car because it's so competitive, it's really difficult to do anything if you're not in the meta car. Now, this is one of those races that a lot of people love, a lot of people hate. I actually really appreciate these races. I don't like them nearly as much as a race where you need real strategy, but I don't dislike this. Bob put on his blinkers right here. I think he might be apologizing. Honestly, that wasn't your fault, Bob, if you're watching. I shouldn't have been as aggressive. I was hoping that I could sneak by him, and I think I bumped his rear quarter panel, which made him oversteer, which then caused me to go off. So that's not Bob's fault at all. That was my aggression. And I should have anticipated that traffic would slow down eventually because everyone's so close still. So yeah, Bob, if you're watching, no apologies needed. That was on me. Okay, back to what I was saying about the strategy. This is the kind of race where you have to take a pit stop at some time, but you definitely don't need tires and you don't need fuel. If you've been following the series at all, we talk about this frequently because it's probably the most common type of race that we get, but the ultimate strategy when it comes to this is pit when you don't have anyone in front of you. The only caveat to that is if you know people and you know that you can work with someone, then it is a good time to pit with them. So if you see that person pitting and you trust them and they trust you, then you can actually push each other down the straights using bump drafting. But if you don't know anyone, your best bet is just to try to get in the pits completely alone. I had almost gone in the pits, but then I realized that despite the fact that the people directly in front of me did not go in the pits, the people that were just in front of them did, and there's no real telling how fast they were. I was at least confident that Bob wasn't going to be incredibly slow, so I took my chances and I stayed out. Now, judging by the quality times that I did see, I was confident that I would be able to make moves on the vast majority of people here and then stay in front of them. If I saw someone was going incredibly fast, then I might actually push them and try to stay behind, but my ultimate strategy would be trying to make moves rather than just staying behind someone. And as you can see by how much space I cleared after passing Black Star, that was definitely the best move in that specific situation. I know I was also talking through that specific exchange, but it's crazy how aggressive you can be with this specific car. You can brake incredibly late and still then get on the throttle incredibly hard and just fly over the chicane, which is one of the main reasons that I chose this car, besides the fact that it's actually incredibly fast and you can pass the meta cars on the straights. After seeing how Bob took the last corner, I was pretty confident that I could corner faster, and I knew that I'd also be able to brake later because of the car, so I went for a pass. I wasn't quite next to him, but I also knew that I was going to be able to brake much later, and he wasn't defending whatsoever, so I don't think that he was too concerned that I was going to hit him, and he actually lifted off before and gave me space. It also could have been a tactic on his part because he has a more powerful car, so if he just lets me go on that section, there's a huge straight that he could then try to make a move on. I wanted to go in the pits now, but seeing the guy in front, I thought he might be in an FT1, and I was not quite sure how fast that car was after the bop, and I didn't see that guy drive whatsoever, so I took my chances with Bob, who I at the very least trust to not be too crazy when it comes to me going for moves. Again, the Supra might be the meta car, but the McLaren can brake so incredibly late that I braked later than him on an inside line, and I still hit the apex, hit my clipping points just perfectly there. I shouldn't say perfectly. We had a more compromised line than Bob, and we actually made it out quicker than he did. So, again, this is why I chose this as your anti-meta car. That was at the beginning of lap 3, and at that point, we actually still had 3 seconds between myself and Anton, so I did not anticipate catching up to him this quick. It was only at the end of the next lap that we already caught all the way up to him, and I had a purple lap, which immediately went bye-bye as soon as we caught up to Anton. So knowing that we're much faster than Anton, we've got to make a decision here. If Anton goes in the pits, we're not going to go in the pits, and that's going to be perfect. If he doesn't go in the pits, we're going to definitely have to go in the pits, which is not going to be exactly ideal. As much as it is a good idea to go in the pits right now, if people went in the pits just 1 lap earlier than me, and they were only maybe a second or less ahead of me, that would mean that if I was going for an undercut and I truly did have better pace than the people who just went into the last lap, I didn't have enough time to build up enough of a gap in front of them, so if I came out, I might actually come out with people who had just pit right before. Since all we knew was that Anton was right in front of us and he was definitely going to be slower and he could potentially cause an issue if he continued trying to battle, going to the pits was the best choice, and lucky for me, there was absolutely no one that could really touch me at this point. Our friend Lewis is right behind, just a little bit more than a full second, but that was probably going to extend because the McLaren really shines throughout this second sector. So I was pretty confident at this point that I'd be able to get all the way away from Lewis, at the very least break any kind of slip, and then we can go get to work at chasing down JS Needham. If I could indeed break away from Lewis, then I wouldn't really have to worry about JS Needham for quite some time because he was a full 4.2 seconds ahead at this point. It then took us 2 full laps to catch up to him. The Evo that he's driving can be really tricky to drive. I drove it earlier and I had 0 luck, but I heard that some people were hitting 48s in the race with it. I was somehow hitting 48s. I actually hit a 48.6 with a little bit of slip using the Hyundai Genesis, not the Genesis X, and I did hit a couple 48s with the McLaren, but besides that, I definitely wasn't hitting any 48s, and I barely hit 49s in the Evo. The Evo, I believe, has either the highest or the second highest horsepower under the new Bape conditions. So the thing's absolutely crazy. And I think it was just because the car is really diabolical. It constantly tried to destroy me when I was driving it. And I have a feeling that's actually why I was able to catch up to JS Needham, because it turns out this guy definitely knows how to drive. One of my favorite moves is to put myself all the way to the left for a corner like this, pretending I'm not going to go for a pass, and then at the last second move over so they don't really have time to react. And at that point, it worked out perfectly. I didn't get a great exit because my entire line was pretty compromised, but neither did he. You can see him slipping out a little bit, but despite that, because he had just a little bit of slip and all of that power, man, that car's fast. He got all the way in front of me leading into this next corner. Once again, here is an example of why I chose the McLaren as our anti-meta car. You can see that I'm extremely aggressive on the throttle as I go over that chicane. I'm telling you, you got to be super, super aggressive. I know it's probably going to be pretty scary, especially if you've driven other cars. The Corvette, for instance, is not the kind of car where you can be really aggressive over there. But the McLaren, you can be incredibly aggressive and just fly over that chicane. I was able to hold off Needham for an entire lap pretty much, but once we got back to that same place as last time, I was forced to defend once again. I don't like being too ridiculous with my defense, so I was just going to float over to the outside and I was going to hold my line. I'm not going to weave or do anything crazy like that. Since it worked so well last time, I was just going to attempt the same thing, brake really late, and he braked a lot earlier, so I moved over a little bit in front of him, which is usually a no-no, but since I was going way past him, I was already all the way in front of him. I moved myself over just a little bit because I knew that he wasn't going to run into me. When people move in braking zones and the person that's next to them is braking deeper, that's when things get crazy. But we had both been fully on the brakes at that point, so that I moved over just slightly so I can get a better angle and then I could fly out of there. And jumping all the way to the final lap, you can see that he stuck with me the entire time. Big shout out to JS Needham. I felt really bad because at the end of the race, I always like to give people the good race, fun race, that kind of thing. But as I tried to save the replay, my entire game froze. I noticed that he tagged me in a message, so if you know him, or JS, if you're watching this, good race. That was really fantastic, and you definitely know how to handle that Evo. After starting all the way in 16th place in top split EMEA and having to battle multiple people, including people in the meta car, finishing 7th place actually felt really good at this point. I do think the 650S is probably the best anti-meta car available, but I encourage you to try a lot of different cars. There are so many different cars that actually work for this week, and it's actually really exciting. As always, thank you very much for watching my video. If you saw me last week, you know that I am now streaming every Wednesday here on my YouTube channel instead of at Twitch. I'm still streaming on Twitch Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, but I'm streaming here exclusively on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Pacific time here in not so sunny Oregon. Don't forget to check it out. Thank you.